Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here with us today. I am Nick Rohn, formerly Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and we can talk more about my name change if there's time later. But before we get to today's program with Jack Kelly, ALN board member and senior fellow, that it will center around ISO 55011. We just want to thank our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, as well as all our organizational members for help making programming like this possible. So thank you for your continued support. And if you're out there wondering how the ALN could support your organization's mission, please reach out. We would love to partner and talk about exactly that. And with that, I will say, if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat, or you can use the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar. And with that, I'll bring in Mike Bordenero, Executive Director for the ALN. Mike, how's it going?
Very good. And Nick, yes, it is good to talk about your name change. Jack Kelly was asking about it just before we went live, and I think we should say that, even though you've said it before, it's a real important story. So will you answer Jack's question about your name change?
Sure, yeah. Just went through the process in the last few months here. I'm not married, but I'm in a committed partnership with Megan Sanders, and we both have kind of agreed to change our last names to something we just came up with, Rohn. We wanted some middle ground, not attached to either of our family structures necessarily, and not because we don't like our families, but just to be our own family. So that's kind of the story.
Because you have two beautiful girls now.
Oh, yes. Well, that makes it especially important. Definitely wanted to share a last name with them as well.
And I think it is a representation of respecting the tradition of family,
Yeah,
but using a new technique. And I
sure.
think society needs to do that. I think asset management, the discipline of asset management that has evolved since ISO 55,000 documents were first established, creates that respect for tradition of asset management, but bringing a new approach to it that's using tools and processes that are now widely available to affect a change. And
wow, Mike, what a segue that was.
and it's not over, because the idea is that a patriarchal view, a command and control view, is not what's necessary. A collaborative, embracing, inclusive view is necessary, and ISO documents spell that out, involve all relevant parties, and respecting the tradition, but creating your own name for establishing your own family is a reflection of that, and that's why I don't mind talking about that again. So thank you, Jack Kelly, for bringing that up. And as Jack Kelly comes on, I want to talk about next week is going to be a very special program. We are doing our first survey in conjunction with the association, the Australian Asset Management Council. And we have a wonderful relationship with the good folks at the Asset Management Council, who Jack Kelly told me, Mike Bordenaro, you got to pay attention to these people. They are really on track here. And we've got a 3-year relationship with this values and benefits from asset management. And now we're doing a survey, a sentiment survey of how people feel asset management is having an impact in their region or in their country. So I'm putting a link to the survey in there. And Jack Kelly is going to be joining us on October 23rd for a special presentation of the value and benefits from asset management, which will be looking at survey results from the US and survey results from the Australian groups. And then we plan on doing this for everyone in the world, so countries can report on how asset management is influencing their nations and having an impact, and we can do it annually. So please go to that survey, click on it so that the link is there for you to fill out later. And what we're going to do is record a ALN Thursday at 3 program earlier in the week, because this time frame makes our Australian colleagues have to wake up in the middle of the night. So if anybody's interested in being an audience Sunday at 5 p.m., you can be part of the program, but otherwise we'll run the recorded program and have a discussion following it. So that's a long introduction there, but it's very well linked to Jack Kelly, who alerted us to the high quality folks at the Australian Asset Management Council. So Jack, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, you've also alerted us to the importance of the ISO 55011 document, and so happy that you could come join us and share what you feel is important about this new document. And I'm going to let everyone know that we have taken, Jack sent such a good email about what he's going to be saying today that we turned it into a little paper that's listed on our website in our content section. And it very concisely summarizes what Jack sees as the value, and the ALN supports that. And so, Nick, if you haven't put the link up to that, go ahead. There, that is. But we got the real deal here. The real McCoy is with us. So, why were you excited about the creation of this guidance document?
You know, it was, I first learned about it back probably in what, 2017 or 18. Jim Dieter had been involved in fact, he and Jack Dempsey were two of the people that instigated the creation of Working Group 7, which is the working group that is responsible for developing ISO 55011. And they did it because they were very interested in how to bring asset management up to the national government level. And so they formed Working Group 7, and it consisted of people from different countries who had used asset management to help support the achievement of national objectives. And so I was excited to become part of that working group because I thought it was something worth doing. And it was also the first time I read the design specification for the kind of the new reinvigorated version of the standard. I was excited by the concept that it was based on. It was based on a concept called the enabling environment for asset management, which I had no clue what that meant, but I really liked the way it sounded. And so I thought, well, this is great. This is a chance to get in on the ground floor and try to make a positive contribution. And I was really impressed by the quality of the people that were on this working group. We had two great, a convener and a co-convener, Tiffany Batac, who was the convener, who had been, and then Dr. Carrie Brown from Australia, who was the deputy convener. And they had both been involved in that working group pretty much since its inception. And so I'm sorry that Tiffany couldn't join us today because she brings an institutional perspective about how this whole thing has evolved that I simply don't have. I'm a relative latecomer to it, but I like to think that I was able to help.
Yeah, we're sorry that Tiffany was not able to join us. She had some work obligations that popped up just yesterday, and she extends her apologies for not attending. But Jack, you said she provided a real interesting perspective.
Well, she had, again, the institutional history of this whole thing. And what I learned, this is the first time I'd ever worked in a working group. And I came to appreciate the role of conveners and deputy conveners in that they basically are there to get the group to interact and to kind of not bring whatever their own agendas to the table are. And that, for me, that would be an almost impossible thing to do. So I really respected Tiffany's even-handedness and very, very gentle way of herding the cats, some of whom didn't want to be herded at all, but she just had a wonderful, calming demeanor and really just helped guide the process very effectively.
Excellent. So can you set the stage? I really love how you describe the difference between ISO 55011 and any of the other ISO asset management documents.
Thank you, Mike. The thing, what was interesting is, and this was a phenomenon that occurred even late in the development of 55011. You had a lot of people who were involved who were kind of stuck in the mindset of the other 55,000 series documents, in the sense that they thought, in fact, there was even late into the process, there was a sense that we needed to make sure that 55,011 was very closely coordinated with the others. And that simply makes no sense at all, because 55,011 is fundamentally different than all of the other ISO 55,000 series standards. It's different in the following way. All the 55,000 series of standards, except for 55,011, are all focused on helping individual organizations achieve their objectives. Like, this is what I want my company to do. And so there are all kinds of different, ways to come at that. You've got 55,000, 55,001, which is like creating a basic asset management system. And you've got 55,010, which talks about making sure that you link your financial data to your asset data. You've got 12 and 13 that talk about bringing in people and competence and bringing in and managing data. So these are all ways to enhance an asset management system. 55,011 is not written to help organizations do anything for themselves. It's written to help organizations influence other entities that have to achieve their objectives. In other words, their organizations. The best example I can come up with is a national government. A national government tends to have national objectives for various things, like, say, water quality or transportation or energy and so forth. And so it has these national objectives, but those objectives have to be achieved through other organizations. Water quality has to be achieved by water utilities. Transportation objectives have to be achieved by transportation service providers. So it's what 55,011 is written to do, is to help those national governments and other government entities influence the entities that have to achieve their objectives. And it gives them, kind of a toolkit to do that. It also helps organizations like the Asset Leadership Network, which advocate the adoption of asset management by other organizations, to come up with a roadmap to influence those other entities to, in this case, to adopt asset management. So it's very different.
In your water example, that would be the American Water Works Association and other.
Well, right,
water.
that would be an advocacy group that wants to advocate the adoption of asset management by their membership, and that's true of other professional associations too. So those are ultimately the most the audiences will probably find 55,011 most useful. To give you an idea of how my thinking has evolved on that, I couldn't have described what I just said to you 3 months ago. When we started writing the standard, we said it was the target audience was aimed at those people and organizations that wanted to advance the adoption of asset management within their political jurisdictions, basically through the use of public policy. Public policy is kind of one of the foundational elements of 55,011, because it's all about how can we influence public policy to encourage the adoption of asset management. And so when we started out, when I first joined Working Group 7, that was the way we thought about it. I just never connected all the dots about, well, guess who's helped write this? The people that have helped write this since the beginning include representatives who worked. Nobody would, except for me, had worked actually in a national government, but they were all asset management experts from countries where asset management had been embraced by the government as a way to, promote the adoption of things like water quality standards and other standards. So it was really, we were thinking about advancing asset management for the sake of advancing asset management. But that wasn't what the motivation was. What the original motivation was advancing asset management to accomplish national objectives. And the other thing is, when you think about how you do that, there are really three parts to achieving that result. The first part is, through public policies, you have to articulate national objectives. They're not always articulated clearly in law or other regulation or other things.
Clean water is easy to just say, but the policy of achieving clean water is very complex.
Yeah, you have to be able to measure, all kinds of quality aspects of the water. So first of all, you've got to articulate them. The second thing you have to do is you have to require the necessary organizations to embrace those national objectives as their own. And I say necessary advisedly, because you want to target you're not just opening the window and say, okay, everybody achieve water quality standards, because not everybody can achieve it. So you focus on the organizations that can do that. And then finally, and this is where asset management comes in, you require those organizations to either adopt or at a minimum demonstrate competence in asset management as a way of providing a greater degree of likelihood that those objectives will be achieved. And at that level, you're back down to the ISO 55000, 55001 world, because that's what those standards do. So the reason I say they weren't connected is because the 55011 series of standards stand together on their own. 55011 comes at that from a different direction and basically says, how can we help influence other organizations to achieve objectives? And by the way, one of the elements of that is they have to adopt or demonstrate competence in asset management. So once they've embraced the national objectives, we have a high degree of confidence that those national objectives will be met.
Okay, so this is great, because what you've just described is what the Asset Leadership Network has been wanting to do. And we've been having an impact on the federal government and encouraging and supporting asset management. However, we now have another tool that we can use, that we can bring to the federal government in a way that supports what we're doing, but allows us to be more pointed.
Right.
Can you talk about how organizations like the Asset Leadership Network, and there's organizations like us in multiple countries, and actually states are developing them now. Not only Michigan, but Minnesota has legislation that has established an asset management group under the Treasury, and Alaska is starting to do that too. So how can these organizations use this tool?
So if you are a government organization already and you understand the importance of using asset management to achieve your objectives, then what 55011 provides is a set of examples from other countries about approaches that have been successful. Do you want to have a law that mandates the adoption, or do you want to have a law that provides incentives for the adoption? Do you also want to provide resources to support the implementation of asset management? So, like special grants, asset management development grants. So there are a whole set of policy tools that have been developed across the world that have been applied in different combinations to help, advance the adoption of asset management. And so if you're already a government entity that wants to do that, 55011 provides you some very useful information. Where it's probably also useful, or we hope it will be useful, is, let's say you live in a country that hasn't yet focused on trying to solve some of its big problems, and how do you, as an advocate of, say, improving the water quality in your country, how do you find a path to influence the government policy making entities to support that? And so there are there's also information within the document that helps you if you're a non-government participant that wants to advocate asset management for whatever reason. It gives you some ideas about how you can, who you can connect with, and how, and ultimately the path, the kinds of things you need to do to create a path to influencing those policies. And the thing I will say, and this, you mentioned the Asset Leadership Network. I know you're well aware, and some of our listeners may be aware, that the Asset Leadership Network several years ago tried to do exactly this. We developed something we call the National Asset Leadership Strategy, and we incorporated into that strategy as best we could the principles from asset management that were available at the time. Well, it turned out that that wasn't enough. They didn't provide the conceptual framework for actually influencing the policy process. We started down the path, but we just didn't have the understanding of all the different players and how they connected with one another to create a full roadmap. So we got stumped, but now I think we're at a point where we can actually pick up where we left off and create that roadmap. And it's going to be different with the way the political structure is in this country. All the policies either originate at the legislative level, where the responsibilities are subdivided sometimes to the subcommittee level, but at least the committee level, or the executive branch level, where some policies can be created by, say, the Office of Management and Budget, where I worked, and those policies have to be there. They could be executive direction, but it has to be consistent with the law with the other laws. It can't override law. So you have to, when you're crafting executive guidance, you have to be mindful of any legislative boundaries that you have to operate in. But nonetheless, you can still, an executive order can achieve, significant results if it's crafted properly.
Okay, so that addresses something that Marty had brought up, which is, like, let's say this rises up to attention from a senator. Well, we had a really successful meeting with Senator Cynthia Lummis, and if this document rose up to her desk and she said, "I want the U.S. government to follow this," I know that's kind of a fantasy question, but can you explain how you think this would happen if it went forward from that position?
That's a great example, and I looked this information up a while back, but I've forgotten it. So the first question I would ask is, so what committees or subcommittees does Senator Lummis sit on? And do any of those have, are they responsible for areas of the government that adopt national policies? So for example, if she sat on the environmental committee, which I don't know if she does, but if she did, then she would have, presumably a great interest in improving the adoption of some of the environmental issues
and let's say specifically water.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and while you're clearing your throat, I don't know if you've got a drink of water there.
I do.
I just wanted to create a little space there for you to be able to.
Thank you.
Okay.
So basically, you have to convince somebody like Senator Lummis to use whatever role they play, and her ability to influence things is going to depend on the role she plays, which is one of the things that this standard was so helpful in kind of shining a light on. It's like what you can do depends on who you are and what your authorities are. So basically, if she sits on a committee that it's the environmental committee and she cares about your water quality standards, then at the committee level, first of all, she would get some of her staff to get read up on what the current legislative tools are. And actually, environment is an interesting area where in the United States, where you've got, the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Acts are very high level, and they themselves don't require any adoption of asset management. But the agency that implements those laws, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, somehow, and I've yet to track down exactly how this happened, but somehow they caught on to the importance of asset management. And so they have embedded asset management requirements and training materials into what they offer on their website. And so I have yet to find whether or not they condition grants and loans based on the adoption of asset management by the potential grantees or loan recipients. But the way that they've structured everything sure makes it look like they do. And it may not be a very heavy-handed approach, like you must do this and we're going to grade you according to these criteria. But when you go out to their website and look at the adoption of water quality, and you just put in asset management in their website, and up comes all this stuff. And so that's in contrast to the other big area where the United States government has taken a very lead role in promoting asset management, which is the transportation area. And you've got, the law Map 21, which was developed back in 2012. So it would have been drafted by people who understood asset management through Pass 55, which was the British, standard predecessor to 55,000.
They were also watching the development of 55,001.
Yeah, but what was so interesting is, they actually, as you know, Map 21 basically conditions the award of federal transportation grants to state highway departments or to local transit agencies based on the demonstration by the potential recipients of an awareness of asset management. And I see, and Canada. So Canada is one of the countries, and I don't understand all the stuff, but Canada has a very active program promoting, and it may be, I don't know how much of this is embedded in their laws, but a very active program in promoting the adoption of asset management at the municipal level, because that's where like 60% of their government infrastructure assets are owned at the municipal level. And that's true pretty much in most countries.
Yes. Okay, so I think you've addressed Marty's question. But Obey brings up another good question about embedding how asset management should be embedded. But I'm going to create another example, because just today I was talking with the University of Rhode Island, and they've got a new board of trustees that did not exist before. And part of their activities are to establish strategic plans. And I am trying to get the ALN to present to them about the importance of asset management and awareness of asset management as part of strategic plans. So if we were able to present to them, what would you say about the way they look at ISO 55011 as a guidance for application of 55,000 and 55,001?
So strategic plans are considered, and they're written up in 55,011 as one of the kinds of public policy instruments that can help advance the adoption of asset management. I had many humbling moments being part of this group. One of them was when I first joined, and I read what they had come up with to define public policy and what they call public policy instruments. The public policy instruments that they were found included things like strategic plans, legislative frameworks, institutional frameworks. They were what they were collections of political policies that existed in their countries. What wasn't well understood at that time was that these public policy instruments that are complex combinations, it could be combinations of laws, regulations, guidance documents, all kinds of different specific things that go into that thing called a legislative framework and strategic plans. When in the strategic plan thing, a strategic plan doesn't just exist out of thin air. There has to be a requirement somewhere to develop a strategic plan, and that requirement is going to be located it could be located in a regulation, it could be located in some other kind of guidance, or it could be required in a law. So the public, as somebody who actually spent a long time in public policy in the government level, when somebody said public policy instrument to me, the first thing that comes to mind is law or regulation. It's the thing that it's the beginning point, if you will, of developing public policy.
It's a mission statement to a certain extent.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way, but the
Okay, I retract that. And Nick is reminding me that I did not state at the beginning that this is not going to be a 30-minute program, that we know Jack's passionate about this, and we appreciate everyone's attendance and interest in this. We understand if you have to leave, but when Jack is on a roll, we don't want to cut him short. So then it's not a mission statement necessarily, but it is directives, a set of directives. It's a why. Why are you needing?
Well, no, it's how you get it's how you create the public policy instrument. You know, if you want. So do you require something by law? So let's say we have a law. We're going to pass a law, and we want to put something in that law that ultimately results in advancing the adoption of articulating national objectives is the first thing that's would be in my mind. What do we as a nation want to accomplish? And then who actually has to accomplish it? What are the entities that have to achieve this set of objectives? And then what do we do? Do we say in law, do we say, let's take environmental protection, and let's say water quality. So do we put in law a requirement that all water utilities adopt the national objectives for water quality? That's not what we've done in this country. What we've done in this country, we've simply there are national objectives, and it's up to the EPA to administer this program and to achieve it. And EPA on its own now has been given the authority by law to develop regulations that actually, do the other things that I mentioned. It's to articulate the national objectives, require that they be embraced by the affected entities, in this case, water utility, and require those water utilities or encourage those water utilities to adopt asset management. Because adopting asset management is what gives you assurance, a higher degree of assurance that you're going to achieve your objectives. And if your objectives include national objectives, that works to the benefit of the national government.
Excellent. Thanks for taking time to clarify that. Now, if you were king for a day, what would you do to have the ALN leverage ISO 55011 to its greatest extent?
So I would reinstigate the national asset leadership strategy with a new set of players that represented some of the interest groups, particularly interest groups that have good lobbying activities, because ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to influence the government policy making processes, and that's in this country that's normally done through lobbying. It's bringing information to the attention of the right people in the policy making process. And one of the things that's embedded in 55,011 is how can interested entities influence the public policy making process, and the how is going to be different country by country, because the policy making process is organized differently, but at the end of the day, what you want to do is have a seat at the table if you can. You want to get your message at least in front of the right policymaking officials so that they can, at a minimum, consider it, and hopefully you provide, compelling arguments for them to embrace that and actually make it national policy.
Okay, so I think you're advocating for an ALN outreach to organizations such as the American Society of Civil Engineers, Society of American Military Engineers, American Water Works.
Exactly.
Those types of organizations. And we will take that as a king's statement, and we reach out to everyone here in attendance, and we'll start establishing what it looks like for the United States to establish a ISO 55011 support group, or we'll come up with a better name than that. But basically how to support creation of the enabling environment to establish a culture of asset management in the United States.
Right. And so one of the things that I've learned about relatively recently, in the last year or so, is this UN handbook, which is, you know, on helping promoting the adoption of asset management, mainly at the local government level. And what it provides, it's a handbook that describes both for national governments and for local governments the things that need to be done to create an enabling environment within the country that supports the adoption of asset management at the local government level. The thing that 55011 does over and above that is it helps understand what interested parties need to do to create the enabling environment above the national government. So it's what can you do? How can you get the influencers who can influence the national government to begin to bring the national government further along so that they start embracing creating an enabling environment at the subnational level. The UN handbook is a great tool for creating it at a subnational level.
And it is a first outside document referenced in ISO 55000 asset management documents. Can you tell us anything about its reference in 55011?
So we didn't mention the UN handbook in 55011. I don't even think I was aware of it when I was helping develop 55011.
Okay.
But it clearly, in fact, that was the second time I'd seen the term enabling environment used. So I was very, very interested in learning what they had to say about enabling environment. So one thing that I think might be useful to just throw into the pot here is that when enabling environment was first defined in the draft specification that got me excited about joining a working group, it was defined as a set of conditions which basically enable the adoption of asset management. It was defined at a very high level, but it wasn't defined in a way that was actionable. Like it's a set of conditions, but who creates those conditions? And so where I think Working Group 7 took a very positive new step that they hadn't taken before is it said, let's take a look at the entities that create these conditions. And those entities at a national level are very much similar to the entities at an organizational level that we consider stakeholders. And those stakeholders create the conditions which at the organizational level are considered the context of the organization. So if you look at 55011, 55000, 55001, they talk about the context of an organization as the conditions created by stakeholders. So if you take that organizational perspective and raise it to the national level, which you're looking at all organizations and all stakeholders, you start realizing that those stakeholders fall into common groups. Some of the stakeholders, say regulators, that's on the government side. So a regulator would be a kind of a stakeholder that would be recognized, say, by a water utility. Then you have also funders, whether the funders are lenders, whether they're appropriators, whether they're shareholders. You've got funders, and you've also got and then you have professional associations. Professional associations probably won't be perceived as stakeholders by individual organizations, but when you take a top-down look of all the kinds of things, they jump out because these are people who come together and they are not only helping improve the capabilities within their own membership, but also in the case of like water in the American Water Works Association, they recognize the importance of asset management, and they have a lot of programs that help not only educate their members on it, but support the adoption of asset management by their membership. And other professional associations are similar in that respect too. So it's looking at the participants in enabling environment gives you an opportunity to think about what can these participants do to influence the adoption of asset management? What are the benefits to those participants from doing that? And in the case of non-government participants, what are some ideas about how those non-government participants can link into the political process? And so that's where this toolkit is so powerful. What it doesn't do, though, is it doesn't say, okay, so who should be in charge of implementing this in any given country. It doesn't go that far. It simply gives whoever wants to do that a tool. I'm hoping that we can learn enough about what should change. Let me say it, future changes to the standard which address that question. Who ought to be in any given country, who ought to take charge within the country of providing that roadmap like we've tried to do with ALNs, and what should they and how can they best use the toolkit to do that? That's something we have to figure out, and that's something that I think there's a certain appetite for that within Working Group 7.
Well, what you have let me know is that there's an ad hoc group that's forming already. And if anybody wants to join this ad hoc group that is trying to create an enabling environment for asset management in the United States, they can reach out to me. I posted my email address. And Jack, I hope you help us convene meetings that will move us in that direction.
We're certainly going to give it a good shot.
Excellent. So one of the things that I loved about asset management, specifically the ISO 55000 approach to asset management, is it represented the human evolution of how to approach gaining value from what we have created in our environment and from our natural environment. And the thing about ISO 55000 is it evolves the thinking of asset management itself. So within just 10, 11 years of this groundbreaking document, it's already advancing. And that's part of what I like about ISO 55001. Well, the 14 version 10.3, the last item on the list is continual improvement. And this is the Escher hand drawing the hand. Their ISO asset management is improving ISO asset management. That's great.
Well, the other thing I want to encourage people to think about, if this is something that they want to participate in a more hands-on way, in general, the adoption of asset, not just the adoption, but the creation of the asset management standards, I really urge them to consider joining the U.S. Technical Advisory Group because the U.S., we call it the Technical Advisory Group, of course, we shorten to TAG. So the U.S. TAG represents the United States in front of the International Standards Organization. So we serve on different technical committees, different working groups. Well, the TAG serves on the technical committee TC 251, which is asset management. But we have a number of working groups within that. Excuse me.
So joining the U.S. TAG would keep you abreast of all the developments in the other ISO asset management documents and allow you to focus on the areas that you are most interested in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the TC 251 has a very good website. The guy who's the convener of Working Group 3, which is the working group that's responsible for communications for all TC 251 matters, has got a great website on the ISO website, and it gives all kinds of great information about what TC 251 does and little snapshots of the different TC 251 standards. So anybody that wants to learn more about what the international asset management community is doing, I highly commend that. And
that web page has just been put on the link there. So people can click on that. It brings you directly to it, and then you can look into it in more detail then. And then reach out to me And we'll put you on the list for when we start meeting to apply the ISO 55011 to the US. So
I'm very curious as to whether or not any of the folks on the call have any questions or comments on what we've been talking about here.
well,
Because
they have been entering questions, and we have been responding to them. And
okay,
we've been answering those questions. So that's been happening as you're going. You've been focusing on being the guest, and Nick and I have been addressing questions and that. So
thank you.
it's been a very dynamic engagement. So thank you, Jack, and thanks to the audience who has made that engaging. And again, if you're interested in this different approach to asset ALN Thursday at 3, next week we'll be doing the program on Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern, and you can be an audience member then, and then we'll record and edit it for presentation on next Thursday at 3. And we will have a live discussion after the recorded presentation. So there will be a live element.
I think I have one final thing an observation I'd like to make about.
Please.
So successful adoption of all of all of the ISO TC 251 standards, the 55,000 series of standards, successful implementation of those standards by an individual organization helps an individual organization. Successful adoption of ISO 55011 helps many organizations.
Yes. And all right, so officially over. We've thanked everybody. We've thanked the attendees. Thank you, Jack. We've talked about next week. And now we can get to some just direct interpersonal things. So I saw what Jack just said, that the United States needed to think of itself as a single organization and apply asset management to it. And Jack Kelly has always told me that's just not how the US government works, Mike. That's not how it's going to be. But I was anticipating ISO 55011, and now we've got that tool to do what I was thinking. And Jack and I are on the same page. So look out, Congress, look out, OMB, and look out. We're going to be coming and being very passionate about what we think will help the United States federal government run to its ideal purpose.
Well, one of the problems with having two Jacks is you always have to give the last name. So, because Jack Dempsey was the one and Jim Dieter both thought that the US government could be approached as a single entity. And it is a collection of entities. I mean, so that's why I think it's like one of the people on Working Group 7 from England asked me a question kind of like that. And she was trying to understand how to influence governments using a 55,001 lens. And I told her that lens didn't work for that purpose. And that's the same thing I would now say to both Jim Dieter and Jack Dempsey. And that is, you cannot understand how to influence a government by looking at the government through a lens that's focused on a single organization. That just, it's not that. What you have to see is that you have to use a lens that kind of disaggregates all these different organizations that come together to form the policymaking process. The sector-based congressional committees, the different executive organizations that can play different roles. I mean, you really have to understand it at that level. And 55,011 is the lens that shows you those things.
And so thank you to the audience members who are sticking around, because I'm just enjoying this conversation with Jack. And now I'm going to go a little bit further and ask, what would have happened in your career if 36 years, at the very beginning of your 36-year career, ISO 55,011 existed, because you had always said, holy cow, I wish I had this ISO 55,001 and 2 when I was working. Well, what would have happened if you had 55,011 when you started your career?
Oh boy. Well, first of all, you have to remember the beginning of my career was helping design Jimmy Carter's reorganization of the federal government. So I had a lot on my plate when I first started. I wouldn't have had time to learn to do anything else. But having said that, once that work was over, if 55,000 series of standards had existed, oh man, I'd have been all over that.
But
I mean,
specifically 11, wouldn't 11 have helped you organize
yes,
the?
what 11 would have helped me do was to think through in a much more profound way than I was able to at that time, think through who the different players were and what they needed to do. The whole concept of national objectives was not in my mind at those days. When you plan government reorganization, you have to have a pretty profound understanding of who the different players are. You have to understand the different legislative committees, what their authorities are. You have to understand what the agency authorities are. You have to understand government functions at a really granular level, authorities and functions at a granular level. So that was good foundation coming into 55,011. But what I had no concept of whatsoever was, having a national objective, and how do you actually, and what do you do to achieve that objective? How you balance within a political framework, how do you balance the appetite for the political framework to mandate something versus the appetite to provide incentives? Mandates are a big deal, and those get very, very political. And sometimes, you simply can't gain political consensus on how to do that. But if you come at it from a different angle, if you say, well, we're not going to mandate it, we're just going to, we're going to score you higher on a federal grant, for example, if you demonstrate your ability to achieve what these objectives are. I mean, we're giving you money to do certain things. So oh, by the way, adopting asset management or demonstrating competence in it is a way that we as the funding agency can have greater confidence in your ability to achieve the objectives of this money. So it's making that connection in a much tighter way.
Yeah, and we had representatives from our ALN Insurance Asset Leadership Board online, and those are organizations that we will want to bring into it, because the insurance incentive is great, and it only
Absolutely
makes sense.
Yeah. So insurance industry and the lending industry. I mean, one of the great stories that we have out of our ALN experience is the DC government, and DC government realizing that they could actually save a lot of money by getting a better bond rating, and they could get a better bond rating by convincing the rating agencies that it lowered their risk if by DC's demonstrating competence in managing their assets better. And that connection, that wasn't a government policy. That was getting getting an organization to identify a participant in the enabling environment, in this case, a funding agency, that it could convince to make that link, better ratings for demonstrated. So there's no law that requires that, but there could be.
Well, Susan, thank you for joining us from Canada. And if you got to go, I understand that. And I just want to build on what Jack said, that the Office of the Chief Financial Officer of DC government wanted to get information about the 100 departments in DC government and better manage the finances. So they required a weekly report on their assets. And then they presented what they did. It took 2 years for that to happen. But when they did present the results to Moody's increased their bond rating, and over 10 years, it was projected that DC government would save $100 million in interests alone. So in addition to have the asset management benefits, they also gained this incredible interest reduction. And any organization can understand, oh, I would be able to do a lot with $100 million. So,
Yeah, and the very same pitch to insurance agencies.
yeah.
You know, like if you demonstrate that you're going to manage your building portfolio or your factory portfolio to reduce the kinds of risks that we're insuring you for, then if you demonstrate competence in asset management, we're going to give you a break. We're going to charge you a lower rate because you are a less risk, insuree by demonstrating that you manage your assets better in a way that reduces the risk back to us. And we're going to share that benefit with you.
And we need to let our audience manage their time well. We thank you for sharing our passion on this topic. Hope you reach out to us and join us as we bring ISO 55011 to the United States. We hope to encourage other countries to do the same thing, and we'll be reporting on our activities in the future. Thank you so much, Jack, for igniting this passionate discussion. Thank you to the audience for your attention. And we'll see you next week with a special recorded program, but we'll have a live discussion as part of that also. Bye for now.
Thank you, Mike.